A lot of manufacturers have been increasing the overall performance of their bottom tier, lower budget optics. Primary Arms, for example, has invested heavily in their SLX lineup of scopes as opposed to their GLX or even their PLX series of scopes. Primary Arms did do a refresh of their GLX line, but it fell flat on its face. And the PLX, as far as anything over their 1 to 8 first focal plane LPVO, well, they really don't have any offerings. However, with their SLX lineup, they have a flavor for everybody. And in this case, this 3 to 18 by 50, well, this thing is almost entirely brand new. But it does still carry over some features from their higher end stuff, which definitely increases the potency of the SLX lineup. As far as what I'm talking about, let's take a look at that right now. The box is standard Primary Arms, which is to say it's more than adequate, especially for the price point. What is the price point, you might ask? Well, the standard price is $500, but they will pop up on sale regularly. One such carryover from their higher end line with the PLXC is this windage turret. So it comes factory capped, which I am a big fan of, especially with a Christmas tree style reticle like this. But if you want to run it exposed and non-locking, you have that option. As far as the weight, this is a slightly chunky optic, coming in on my scale just under 33 ounces. It's only a 30mm tube, but it is a 50mm front objective, and it is pretty long, kind of sort of similar to the Meopta Optica 6. Inside of a GG&G mount, it comes in roughly at 38 ounces, but the Meopta by itself comes in on the scale at about 30 ounces, so still about 10% lighter than what this Primary Arms comes in at. As far as the overall length, you can see matching up the erector housing side by side. Well, the optic is still a little bit longer, but not by much. I will say, though, that the longer the optic, typically the better the optical performance, so I'll be very curious to see how well this thing performs. As far as the overall fit and finish of this optic, it's actually quite high. The anodizing has a little bit more of a shine to it than I personally like, but it is even and feels really solid throughout. Giving it a real quick once-over, it looks like Primary Arms did a lot of little detail work to this scope, which I so far appreciate. As far as the fast focus eyepiece, it is very rigid and hard to turn, and when we pull it out, it has very little to no wiggle. Again, though, this is factory fresh right out the box, so that could and probably will break in over time. Another carryover that we see from the PLXC is the thumb ramp, which is absolutely required on this optic because the throw range on the magnification ring is well over 180 degrees. I really do love the fact that Primary Arms has basically standardized on that throw lever because it's quintessentially perfect. As far as the illumination control, I love that they have a smaller, recessed, coin-slided battery compartment cover. As far as the illumination control itself, there are 6 total brightness settings with offs in between. It locks up in the detent well enough. It doesn't really pop or snap into the next location, but it's good enough. Another thing I quite like is when scopes look uniform. And as far as what Primary Arms did with this, all of the touch points are very similar from control to control. But I will say that on the illumination and the side parallax, it does feel a little bit too slippery. As far as what the inside of the battery compartment looks like, it's a standard 3-dimple board on the bottom and 6-spring leaf spring on the cap. Like I was saying, the side parallax knob and the illumination control feel very slippery, and it takes a lot of effort for me to turn this side parallax knob for the first time. As far as what it indicates to, it goes well below its minimum of roughly 10 yards to its maximum at about 180 degrees. It's a very large knob, so we should have a fair amount of finite adjustability with it when we are focusing on certain range on targets, so we'll be checking that out momentarily. It does feel good otherwise. I'm sure it'll breaking a little bit, but I do wish that the outside texture had a little bit more bite to it, because your fingers feel like they're just going to slip off. On to the turrets, and the elevation turret on this thing is quite large, 10 mils per rotation, with a rotational indicator underneath. The zero stop on this thing is very assertive and aggressive and locks up wonderfully. Unfortunately, the detents on this thing are a lot softer and mushier than I personally prefer. I do believe most of that is down to the seal inside. As far as the windage turret, it comes capped out of the box, but as you saw earlier, it does include the cap for the turret if you want to have it be exposed all the time. I love that Primary Arms offers this as a feature. I wish more companies would start doing the same because it's wonderful to be able to go from one personal preference to another. As far as how the windage turret feels and sounds, it's better than the elevation. And that's it, folks. Let's take a look at this thing's reticle. Now, this scope does come in 3 reticle options, this being the Athena BPR Mill reticle. The other 2 options are the DMR in 308 and the Apollo in 308 or 6.5 Grendel if you don't want to worry about dialing for your holds. So it's nice, again, that Primary Arms offers different reticle options. I wish more manufacturers would do the same. As far as how the illumination looks here, it's actually quite bright on my paper background. And as far as the reticle setup, I really love that Primary Arms did very large posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12 to draw your eye to the center. At higher magnification, you can very clearly tell that we have a slight chevron in the middle. Some people would prefer a finer dot. Kind of impartial because at least here the chevron's not that large, so it's not going to obscure much of your target. Beyond that, the outside first mill drop is very, very fine compared to the rest, and on the windage holds it goes out to 2 full mills, so it's something that you're going to have to get used to. I do love the illumination on this thing. It's very even, very bright, and very well done. Again, kudos to you, Primary Arms, for doing a good job with the reticle setup so far. You can very clearly see the mush to the turret that I was talking about earlier. The zero stop is fantastic though, and I love that we get 17 mils of elevation gain from my zero. It is wonderful to see that. I consider this optic to be more precision focused. It's very large, it has exposed elevation and potentially windage turrets if you so choose, and the reticle itself indicates that this is going to be much more for precision use. Makes sense. So as a result, this thing has to track pretty good. So far, the reticle lines up to my tracking test flawlessly. As far as when I adjust the side parallax, it does a little wonkiness here down at 41 yards where the center goes really sharp or the outside edge goes really sharp. But when you balance between the two of them, one of them goes soft, either the center or the outside edge. So I'm clearly going to go for the center being perfectly sharp and the outside edge having a bit of a softness to it. Starting with the actual tracking section, we're going to be going 4 mils up and 4 mils over. And where we wind up over here, as you can very clearly tell, is slightly off the mark. We're about 1/10 of a mil off on the windage and 1/10 of a mil off on the elevation. Zeroing out our windage was perfect, but you can still see we are off by about 1/10 of a mil on the elevation. Let's continue to plus 10 mils of total elevation. Now, my target only goes up to 9 mils, so we're going to have to use the reticle at the 12 o'clock position to line up against the rest of the target, which is another nice thing about a reticle like this. You could use it in a multitude of ways. As far as where we wound up, I'll let my in-camera audio do the talking. All right, so I went up to 10 full mils, and you can see that the mil markers at 12 o'clock are not lining up with the rest of the target. So let's split the difference. 1, 2 clicks off, or 2%. Let's go back to 9 mils to let you understand where the chevron would line up. There you go. 1, 2, exactly 2 mils. So 2/10, I'm sorry. So exactly 2% off, which might sound like a lot, but even very high-end optics have that much slop. Up 10 full mils, 1, 2. We still have consistency. Back to 0. Back up 10 full mils, 1, 2. And back to 0. Let's check for slop in the windage. Looks solid. Elevation. Excellent performance as far as checking for slop. Now, yes, 2% is a lot, but I have seen high dollar optics be that far off. Is it the best? No, obviously it's not. 0 would be the best, but it could be much, much worse. At least this thing is pretty consistent. So this video is going to be released in July of 25. I filmed this October of 24. Yes, a lot of other scopes have come across my table that took priority. If you were really interested in the scope, I sincerely apologize. Illumination out here is fantastic. It is definitely on the better end of things as far as overall brightness goes on an MPVO like this. Another thing we haven't talked about yet is the scope body itself, or rather lack thereof. It is beautiful on the levels of Razors. That's right. Razor HD Gen 2s and this, very similar overall performance and experience behind it. That is pretty high praise. The reticle out here in my backyard is pretty hard to pick up at 3x without the aid of illumination, but with illumination, it is very easy to pick up even in the dark shadowy areas of a pretty dense forest area. Slowly increasing the magnification to its maximum, the side parallax is set roughly where it needs to be, and once we bring it all the way up to 18x, you'll see that we have about as good of a looking image as we could possibly get. I do play around with the side parallax in a moment to see if we can really extract any more sharpness out of it, but ultimately it's going to be about as good as it's going to get. So far, this thing is looking pretty solid. Low light matters for scopes like this because you might be putting this on a pseudo hunting rifle. I myself am a big fan of the 3 to 18 magnification range for a plethora of different reasons, and something like this could absolutely be found on any caliber of rifle, but I'm going to specifically state more of like a 22 LR for backyard varmint hunting. As far as ambient light through the camera, not looking at or through the scope, you could see we have a pretty fair amount of detail down there around that tree. Getting back behind the optic at 3x, and you'll see that it looks about the same, maybe a touch darker. Illumination is visible on this scope all the way out to the outside edge of the image, which is, again, quite wonderful. Not every scope can perform such a feat. Slowly increasing the magnification out here, and again, when we get to its maximum magnification, it doesn't really seem like the image gets darker at all. Now, one thing you must remember when you are shooting in lower light environments is that the exit pupil of a scope will not change, but your iris diameter will. And when it's lower light outside, your iris dilates, and then you get some really weird shadowy effects going on when you're looking through an optic. As far as the exit pupil on the scope from Primary Arms' website, they claim 8mm at 3x, which is a little bit on the smaller side, but 2.8 at 18, which is a little bit on the bigger side. So far, everything we've looked at has been pretty promising, but we're at much closer distances. Now we're going to shift our attention to much farther distances. This first solar panel is going to be at 360 yards, so I set my side parallax accordingly, and I slowly increase the magnification. One thing you must note is, again, the center of the image looks really sharp, but on the outside edge, especially at farther distances, you can see that softness that I was talking about earlier. In my backyard at about 81 yards, it didn't seem that bad, but at greater distances, it's starting to get a little bit worse. Also note the glare on the back of the lens. That is caused from just ambient light reflecting off of that and back into the camera and or back into your eye. Illumination out here is still quite good, but I shut it off because there's no need to really run it. Slowly starting to increase the magnification to its maximum here at 360 yards yields that the side parallax, being set to where it should be distance-wise, is very accurate to what we are looking at downrange. So the center part of the crosshair right on that solar panel looks quite good, but again, if we look at the outside edge of that power tower, it does get a little bit softer on the outside edge, and there's not a huge difference between those as far as distance goes. So again, the outside image on this is definitely going to be a little bit softer. Some positives to take away from this, though, is that there's very little purple or green fringing. Maybe it's ever so slight touch against the sky on the far left side of the power tower, but really that's not bad compared to how a lot of other optics have performed in the past. Focusing our attention now on the 500-yard power tower, we will see that we have a fairly similar performance as far as the overall center sharpness, again with side parallax, but you can see a little bit more purple fringing on that power line that's going through the top left quadrant of the image. You can see it right there on the hard edge against the sky. Beyond that, though, again, the image looks quite composed and pretty solid. Another slight negative is that the image at 6 o'clock is much softer here than it was at closer distances. So let's push this back even further, in fact a total of around 2,000 yards against the horizon, to see if that'll show even worse performance. At 2,000 or so yards at the center, we can't really tell because the bottom edge of the image is against much closer targets, which wouldn't be in focus anyway. But where it counts in the center to about 4 mils out, maybe 5 mils, it's pretty solid. It's not the end of the world. There have been scopes that perform way worse than this, but I'd still like to see a little bit more of a balancing act for how the scope is performing and acting right now. What I mean by that is they went for such a small scope body to be visible, and the cost for that was sharpness to the image. At 1,000 yards, at 10 plus mils of added elevation, you can clearly tell that the phenomenon that we're having with the soft image at 6 o'clock is only exacerbated. It is very bad. So if you're going to be using this thing for dialing and then possibly holding, just know that it's not going to be ideal. If you are dialing for elevation, then at least you'll be happy to know that the center part of the image will still stay pretty focused. But now, south of 2 mils on the elevation drops, it really falls apart quite aggressively. Returning the turret back to 0 and reacquiring our target, you'll see that the center is still more or less the same, but at 6 o'clock, the tower itself looks much, much better. It's an unfortunate side effect of cheaper end optics trying to get the most view per dollar. And the biggest side effect on this is going to be its overall sharpness to the image. Image stability, though, at 18x is pretty decent. The reticle does start to taper off towards the outside edge, as does the image, but it's not the end of the world. The shadows are at least fairly progressive, and they don't completely shut the image off. At 15x, we have a slightly better performance, and one that I would be perfectly happy using in most long distance environments. In fact, that's what I did. And 15x on this thing is quite good. 18x is still usable, but not as usable as 10x. This thing really starts to get more and more impressive the lower we go down, which again makes sense, but it seems to be a little bit disproportionate. I think it performs much better at the lower magnifications than it does the higher magnifications. Again, though, this is a $500 optic, and it's doing a lot. It's giving us a huge view looking through it, a very small scope body, really good illumination, good reticles, and unfortunately, something's got to give, and in this case, it's going to be its overall optical maximum performance capacity, if that makes any sort of sense. At 3x, even though we only have about 8 millimeters on the exit pupil, it responds quite well to overall movement behind the optic, but you'll see at the far extremes of looking through it, it does fall off as far as stability goes. To make that live for you a little bit more, here we are in a more dynamic approach to it. Minimum magnification, maximum illumination at a closer target, and here the 3x looks absolutely wonderful. I love that you could see the illumination all the way to the outside edge of the view looking through it on the inside, and the 3x on this thing performs more like a really well-sorted prism than it does a magnified optic. Splitting the difference in magnification to 10x, the illumination is superb. View through it might be a little bit on the tighter side, but the image stability is pretty good at 10x. I really like this scope and how it operates at 10x, but at 18x as seen here, it definitely gets a little bit tighter than most. Again, the illumination helps draw your eye to the center, so if you're not perfectly behind it in a really awkward position and you're using illumination, you can use that as a crutch to help get right behind it, nice and centered. Overall, the performance isn't bad, but I would like to see a touch more. Let's finally get into our side-by-side comparisons. And first up is going to be the SLX on the left against, well, the older generation SLX on the right. Specifically, the 4-16x44, which, if you have watched that review, you will know that I was a tremendous fan of, because optically, that thing performed insanely well. Only a $300 optic, whereas this new SLX 3-18 on the left is $500, basically twice the price. Yes, the new 3-18 has a better suited reticle for the magnification range. I kind of wish that the 4-16 would have a hybrid between these two. But optically speaking, the 4-16 is vastly superior. Again, we're going from a 4x multiplier in the 4-16 to a 6x multiplier in the 3-18. So if you're running the exact same glass, it has to work 50% harder minimum for the 3-18 as opposed to the 4-16. Another few key differences. The 4-16 was a ½ inch longer at 14¼ inches long, whereas the 3-18 is 13.6. Weight-wise, though, there is almost an 8-ounce difference between these two, obviously the 4-16 being lighter at 25 ounces. Field of view is going to be a little bit different, again, only because the magnification is different, but is it really that much of a difference here at their minimums? I don't really think so at 180 or so yards, but for anyone that wants to know the numbers, at least with what Primary Arms claims, 26.6 to 6.5 with the 4-16, and 35 to 5.9 with the 3-18. Exit pupil is the biggest difference, but again, the magnification difference has something to do with it. But on the 4-16, it's 11.5 to 2.7 versus 8 to 2.8, and both the eye reliefs are set at 3.7 inches. The 4-16 SLX was a bargain wonder. Optically performed stellar at every magnification, at every sort of position behind it. But unfortunately, you can't buy it anymore because Primary Arms, their infinite wisdom, decided to discontinue it, along with so many other really good optics. But people want to buy scopes that are more capable. So they want the 3-18 versus the 4-16. They want the 6-36 as opposed to the 5-25. There's all these different things that consumers want, that companies are trying to provide. So yes, I totally get it. And yes, the 4-16 didn't have anywhere near as nice feeling turrets or bright illumination or a reticle that was much better suited for the magnification range. It worked very well, but it could have been vastly improved. And yes, the new 3-18 carries over a lot of better features as opposed to the 4-16. But optically speaking, the 4-16 leaves the 3-18 in the dust. No 3-18 comparison will be complete until I roll in the Meopta Optica 6, which I still need to refilm for. This is old footage, and I've tweaked my settings a lot since then, so it's not perfect, at least here at 3x, but at the higher magnifications, you can't really tell the difference. Now, oddly enough, the Meopta Optica 6 is available right now at EuroOptic for $900. Which is a little bit more than what it was selling for, but it's still a really solid optic. As far as the overall length, the Optica is longer, an inch longer, 14.6 to 13.6. We already looked at that earlier. As far as the weight, again, the Optica is going to be a little bit lighter. As far as the field of view, they're going to be kind of sort of similar. The Optica is going to be a little bit smaller only because we have a smaller view looking through it, so 33.5 to 5.8 versus 35 to 5.9. Our overall exit pupil is going to go in favor of the Optica 6, however, 9.5 to 2.8 versus 8 to 2.8. And the eye relief is going to be a little bit more forgiving with the Meopta. Is the Optica a better overall package? For me personally, yes. I like the reticle more, I like the controls more, I like the overall setup and features of the Optica 6 more. But it's basically twice the price of the SLX, which is a huge pill to swallow, especially when I don't really know exactly where the Meopta Optica 6s are manufactured. I've heard a lot of different answers over the years. Some say they're assembled in Florida, some say that they're completely made in China. I really don't know, and Meopta does a really good job of not letting anybody else know either. So if these are both Chinese-made optics and the Optica is nearly twice the price of the SLX, does it really perform twice as well? Optically, I would say that the Optica is a better overall product. I love the elevation turret and how it looks. Capped windage on both is stellar. I still like the fit and finish and the polish of the Optica 6 more, and I like the overall generalized experience behind the Optica 6 a lot more. But if you're trying to get bang for your buck, no one can argue with a $400 price difference. And at that point, the SLX is going to be the clear winner. Durability-wise, can't really say much for the SLX, but for the Optica, the individual on Rock Slide has put many Optica 6s through their paces, and they've all wound up at the end with flying colors. They're wonderful, and they're tried and true. I love mine. Do I plan on selling it? No. Would I replace mine with an SLX and get $400 cash in my pocket? Probably not. Optically, they're both pretty good to one another, but the edge definitely has to go to the Optica 6. Let's now take a look at an American-made 3-18, the Steiner T6Xi 3-18 by 56. This features a 34mm tube, so much larger than the SLX in two regards, but it also has a much larger price tag, about $1,800, which is a lot of money. Lengthwise, they're the same. Weight-wise, they're almost the same, about 2 ounces difference, so take that for what it's worth. Overall field of view, they're very close, but the edge definitely goes to the Steiner. Look at the view looking through that thing. It is monstrous. Exit pupil also goes to the Steiner, but not by a great deal. And the eye relief is basically a toss-up. There's about a 1/4 inch difference between the two, the edge going to the primary arms. The only reason I'm comparing these two side by side is what happens if you're really curious about an SLX versus something of a much higher price point. Can it compete in one way, shape, or form? I think that this video is going to prove that the new SLX can compete in most cases, and it will shine brightly, just like the Illumination will in most cases. The T6Xi is got a lot of features, a lot of really sweet features, and it's got to be respected and appreciated. But the MSR2 reticle, as seen here in the T6Xi, I feel is vastly underwhelming for its magnification range. I do feel that the Mil GPR reticle, I want to say it is, and the SLX is a better overall suited reticle for the magnification range. Optically, I think the T6Xi has a lot more purple fringing than the SLX. I mean, you could see that for yourself. Sure, the SLX right now has a little bit on the target backer, but the T6Xi has it on the piece of steel in the top right corner, and it has a lot more than that when you see the backer at 200 yards. The view looking through both of these is honestly quite impressive. The controls, the T6Xi is wonderful. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but again, the only real reason why I'm comparing these two is there a significant enough difference to really make a difference for you to spend basically 3 times the price, almost 4 times the price? And, well, I just want to make your life a little bit harder. For many of you, you'll look at both of these and go, I think the SLX is more than adequate for my uses. And I would probably agree, unless you're really trying to eke out the absolute maximum potential. Maybe the T6Xi will fit that bill. But again, I think that there's a lot of other optics, whether it be in the 3 to 18-ish magnification range or above, that perform better than the T6Xi for a lower price point. So just because a scope like the T6 is so much more expensive than the SLX doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to perform at such a higher level. My last comparison for this video is actually going to be probably the most serious one. The Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 4-20 by 50. Athlon sent this optic in to me to review after I had shown them my 2-12 review. They loved what I did and they wanted to get more of their products out to market. So kudos to you, Athlon. That doesn't mean I'm going to pull my punches. You'll actually see in a soon to come out new Athlon review that the optic that I review in that is subpar. But the Helos BTR Gen 2 is not subpar. I would hazard a guess to even say it is well above average, but the price point is not. It's only about $60 more expensive than the primary arms, which is, well, not a lot of money, especially considering that the Helos has much better locking turrets. slightly better overall controls, I would say, better touch points, and optically speaking, well, it is vastly superior. Reticle, I also think, is much better on the Helos. It has that very fine center dot that so many people like. It has a very clearly labeled Christmas tree style reticle that's very easy to pick up. It also has very good illumination. It's also much lighter than the SLX by 5 ounces. That's a huge saving. That's a mount in weight savings. That cannot be ignored. Our overall field of view is going to be different, again, because the magnification range, 3 to 18 versus 4 to 20. So, of course, it's going to go with the SLX. But the Helos is still no slouch at 27.9 to 5.6 versus 35 to 5.9. So even though the Helos has 2x more on the top end, it's right on the heels of the SLX as far as its overall field of view at maximum magnification. I don't have any statistics for the Helos' exit pupils, so I'm not going to say anything, but I will mention that using the Helos was quite easy, and I had no issues with it whatsoever. As far as the eye relief goes, they're basically the same. So this is a perfect case point of two optics that are very similar to one another. Both of them are made in China. Both of them are similar enough magnification ranges, similar prices, similar weights, similar sizes, and overall fit and finish. But in this case, I think the Helos wins by default because it is just an overall better package in many different ways without costing a significant more amount of money. Hate it or love it, that's going to be my choice between these two. I'd absolutely sacrifice the 1x minimum on the SLX and gain the 2x on the Helos to get all the benefits of the Helos as an overall package. But your opinion might be the exact opposite, in which case I give you the Primary Arms SLX 3 to 18 by 50. It's good. Is it worth $500? It's close. Would I rather save a little bit more money and maybe go for an Arkin SH4? It's close. I do like where Primary Arms is going with the SLX lineup. They've introduced a lot of key features to this that do improve upon the previous generation SLXs, even though optically I do prefer how the older SLXs ran, especially that 4 to 16 by 44. That thing was an absolute peach. I wish I had one. I really do. I would actually take one of those capped, both windage and elevation turrets. Just leave it with just the reticle and just have it be as optically beautiful as it is. Just use the drops. They were very effective at the higher magnifications. It would have been a really good just set and forget style optic. But unfortunately, nothing. Both good, bad, and indifferent things last forever. So sad to see is the way of the 4 to 16 going that of the Dodo. And it's unfortunate because I feel the 4 to 16 magnification range is one of the best mid-range magnification ranges of any optic. I've been meaning to actually do a video essay on that, about stating my love for 4 to 16s, because you can have, like the SLX, for example, a very inexpensive optic that performs optically so well for not a lot of money. But that's a topic for another time. This 3 to 18 definitely has seen some vast improvements physically, except in the weight department. 32, almost 33 ounces is a lot for a 3 to 18 with a 30 millimeter tube, but it's still more or less in line with most other options that we've looked at. As far as do I recommend this to people? Only if the features and the setup that it has interests you. If you're really on the fence between this and maybe going with something else, maybe going just outside the magnification range, maybe up or down, well, there are a lot of other options. The Helos BTR Gen 2 4 to 20 by 50 is one such example, where you can go to a slightly higher magnification range and go from a 6x multiplier to a 5x multiplier and really get a much better experience behind the optic. I'd even recommend a 3 to 15 in most cases as opposed to 3 to 18 with cheaper glass, again, because that lower multiplier value. I cannot stress that enough. Just because you have a 1 to 10, for example, doesn't mean that you're getting a scope that's going to be optically perfect from 1 to 10. In fact, even the highest priced 1 to 10s still have significant optical flaws to them. I don't care what you say, I will die on that hill. And the trend of these lower priced, cheaper glassed optics going into the trend of higher multipliers, going from a 4x, 5x, now 6x, a lot of them are going 8x. I think that they're just being pushed a bridge too far. If this was a 3 to 15, I could almost guarantee it would perform vastly better than how this is performing. And this is already performing at a very high level. So just imagine how much better it could be. And unfortunately, the biggest, the worst, the saddest thing that I could say is I don't think we'll ever get the chance to understand or realize that, because I don't think manufacturers are going to go in the realm of usability, practicality, and overall base performance. They're going to try to push numbers because numbers sell. No one buys a car with 200 horsepower when they could buy a similarly priced car with 400 and it's more or less about the same. Just look at cars like the GR86, for example. Yeah, it might be very pretty and small and lightweight and rear-wheel drive and have 200 horsepower, but you can get a base Mustang with more horsepower in a very similar package for about the same price. It really depends on the individual buying it if it's going to be right for their uses. Anyway, that's it for this review on a very somber, sobering note. Hopefully you'll find this video useful enough to make or break your decision on this. If not, there are plenty of other fish in the sea. With all that being said, thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you can still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.